no one sitting there. That would have been weird otherwise. Okay, so let's start off with a wee bit of new material before I get into my main event. So, I grew up, well, I was born in the 70s, but I grew up in the 90s, and there was a lot of misinformation. We didn't have Google. We couldn't get accurate information about almost anything unless we resorted to encyclopedias. And so we had to resort to word of mouth, which did cause a lot of misinformation, or fake news, as our orange presidential wannabe wants. Anyway, and so my mother, you would think your parents should be a source of reliable information, but I think my mother might have been working on bad information, kind of like Chinese whispers or telephone, as our American brothers call it. Because when I was a kid in the 80s, then we encountered a man who was clearly gay. Nothing wrong with that, power to the people, but my mother had to, of course, try and describe to me, so what's wrong with that man who addresses everyone as Ducky? And so she said, well, they don't like girls, they like men. I'm like, okay, so far so good. But she goes, well, when they're alone, they try and put their man parts in the other man's bottom. And that was an unintentionally deeply confusing phrase, because try implies not succeeding. And she also did not indicate that they had to be in a state of arousal. And she also didn't indicate that they enjoyed it. And so this caused a lot of confusion in my young mind. So I had visions of a man who was completely floppy and clearly very bored, just crashing himself into the other guys behind and not managing. And it's like, well, I have done some weird stuff when I was bored, but I have never done that. But anyway, that was that. So, on to the main event. So, I don't know if any of you guys have heard of Sir Walter Raleigh. Not essential? Well, basically, an Englishman who Queen Elizabeth was a very big fan of, not the QE2, but the original one, and he would go off swanning around the place, occasionally setting fire to Spanish ships, but he also would bring back wonders to our Queen and present them to her in court, and he brought back the potato. And so you can imagine the scene, he arrives at court, my Queen, I bring forth the potato. Oh my word, Sir Walter Raleigh, whatever is it? It is a tuber from the New World. Don't you worry, madam, I have a stove set up right here, and in 10 to 15 minutes, with a bit of butter, you're going to be so impressed. Whoa, Sir Walter Raleigh, you're amazing. Well, okay, enough about that, but he also is famous for introducing tobacco, which many of you may or may not be big fans of. And so I tried to take up smoking, but I didn't have the willpower. Anyway, so I just couldn't stick with it. Call me a quitter if you like, but anyway. So tobacco, on the other hand, comes from Native America, and back in the days, they didn't roll it up into cigarettes or have snus. No, instead, amazingly, they would take a load of tobacco plants and boil them up in a pot, and it would concentrate it down into kind of a blob of tobacco-y goodness. And then what would they do? They would stick it up their bottoms. And this would cause so much nicotine to flood into their system, they would go off on a vision quest and be seeing things that weren't there. So I can see Grandpa. And rather than people thinking he probably shouldn't have done that, they were like, wow, he's brilliant, let's make him the medicine man. Yeah, not a normal response. And can you imagine Sir Walter Raleigh presenting this form to the Queen? It's like, oh, Sir Walter, you're back again. Yes, madam, I bring forth tobacco. Oh, whatever is it? It's like, don't you worry, I have a stove standing by. I have 15 plants. If you could bend over and remove your bloomers, you are going to have an amazing time. Quicker than you can say off with his head, that would not work out for him. But anyway, lucky for Sir Walter, and for not so lucky for us, he did eventually discover, roll it up into cigarettes and smoke it, or use a pipe. And yes, he probably turned up at the court and the Queen would say, oh, you appear 20% cooler, Sir Walter. Well, it's because I'm smoking this, Anyway, but in the course of researching this routine, I decided to try and find a reference to this whole sort of sticking tobacco up your bottom. Oh, while I remember, I did think to myself, how on earth could you stumble upon this? It's one thing to be wandering through the wilderness, find a new plant and think, I'm going to eat some of that, see what happens. But, I know I'm a lousy cook. I have great limitations when it comes to cookery. But of all the messes I've ever made in a kitchen, I have never stuffed dinner up my bottom. So how could this have been stumbled upon? The only way I think it could have taken place is, let's say there was a tribe and the chief was very upset at the cookery that was going on and said, okay, chef, if you produce one more lousy pudding, I'm going to stuff that pudding right in your bottom. And the cook said, well, don't you worry, chief, I am truly confident you're going to love this one. I call it tobacco surprise. And it ended up being a surprise for him, but then he saw his grandpa floating in the sky and, you know, medicine man. Anyway, where was I? Yes, so back to the research for the original reference to this. I tried to find the reference to stuffing tobacco up your bottom, and I came across something surprising. In the 1800s, because, you know, people didn't have CPR, it wasn't invented until 1950, then when someone appeared to be dead, like this is a truthful account, they hauled a woman out of the Thames and she was cold to the touch. She seemed lifeless. The medical practitioner who was called there was stuck for ideas. And, you know, rather than just calling last rites, apparently a passing sailor suggested, hey, doctor, I think you should blow smoke into her bottom. I bet that would bring her back to life. And the doctor did not say, you've been in the rum again, go away, you alcoholic. No, instead the doctor went, don't you worry, got my supply of tobacco, got a set of bellows, hold on. And honest to goodness, grabbed a set of bellows, filled it full of smoke, jabbed it in the woman's bottom, and probably the surprise having loads of smoke up her bottom, suddenly, whoa, she's back to life. So this actually became standard equipment. They actually had, instead of having, you know, the red and white life bands on the side of the thing, they had tobacco stations dotted along the Thames. In case of drowning, then just grab the bellows, light the coal, and away it goes. It's like, charge to 250. Don't you die on me. I mean, I have visions of, you know, how in America you get a DNR tattoo, it's like, do not revive. I mean, clearly in the 1800s you just have no smoking signs on your ass cheeks. And that's actually, honest to goodness, this is where the phrase blowing smoke up your ass comes from. Ugh. I'm glad that died out, because guess what? It turned out not to be very effective. It was clearly some kind of fluke. The woman wasn't dead, maybe she was faking it, and then suddenly, ouch, what was that? Oh, busted. But anyway, still on the wonderful topic of bottoms, the following story took place in the 90s, when my older brother, who's a doctor, he was on a rotation, and you may or may not have heard of the drug Rohypnol, which did gain notoriety as the date rape drug. Very, very naughty. But it does have a medical application. If you need a patient to be conscious, but maybe a bit mellow, and you'd prefer if they didn't remember it afterwards because it's terribly embarrassing, this is the drug for them. So when someone has to have an examination up their bottom using one of those little cameras with all that, they give them Rohypnol. And so a very classy Edinburgh lady came into the clinic and she had a nasty polyp in her bottom. So they said, madam, we're going to give you this drug in 30 minutes, we're going to begin the procedure. She's like, yes, I quite understand. And it's like, okay, so sure enough, 30 minutes later, it's like, okay, madam, we're going to commence now. And she was all very mellow, oh yes, that's fine. And then, you know, a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a... And at that point, she suddenly shouts out, Henry, remember our agreement! I don't know if her husband's name actually was Henry, but what kind of agreement? Hello? And of course, right afterwards, she had retrograde amnesia, so she had no idea that she'd said any of this. But all the doctors really want to know, who's Henry? What's the agreement? But, oh, they're never going to get to know that. Anyway, you guys have been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.